Just a warning, this episode contains topics and/or language that could be heavy or triggering and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hey everybody, I'm Zoe.
And I'm Chandi.
And this is Bound by the Cloak. Joseph James DeAngelo was known as the East Area Rapist, as well as other monikers. The most notable one being the Golden State Killer. Between 1974 and 1986, DeAngelo committed a multitude of crimes ranging from burglaries, violent rapes, kidnapping, and murder. At the time, the Golden State Killer had proved to be difficult to identify and apprehend. He would frequently wear ski masks during the attacks to cover his face. For years, he worked as a police officer and flew below the radar. In 2018, he was finally identified and arrested due to the use of genealogy and DNA database records. DeAngelo was convicted of 13 murders, at least 50 rapes, and 120 burglaries.
In 1976, when she was just 15 years old, Kris Pedretti was attacked in her own home by a man who would later be known as the East Area Rapist or the Golden State Killer. For decades, she carried that trauma in silence, not knowing who he was, and with no one and no safe space to fully share her story. But Kris is no longer silent.
Today, she's not only reclaiming her voice, but she's also helping others find theirs. As the founder of Phyllis's Garden, Kris has built a survivor-led community rooted in compassion, dignity, and connection. Kris joins us today to speak about the night that changed everything, the long silence that followed, and the trauma. But more than anything, it's about what comes after. It's about survivors leading the way and how healing can take root and grow beyond violence.
Kris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on your podcast.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the show today?
Sure. So my name is Kris Pedretti, and back when I was a child, I was assaulted by the East Area Rapist, soon to become the Golden State Killer. He started as a burglar, as many of these guys do. He did 120 burglaries in Exeter, and he was a cop. He was a police officer. And then he moved to Sacramento. This is all in California. And he began his series of raping. And he raped at least 50 women, and some of them included their husbands. And then he moved to Southern California, where he murdered 13 people. And when I was attacked, I was number 10, and I was a kid. I was 15 years old. And I really found it hard to handle because, it's hard to handle anywhere. But in 1976, we didn't have the support we have now. We didn't have the laws that we have now. We didn't have the knowledge or the tools that we have now. And so for so many people who were assaulted, that's an unthinkable act, but it turned into an unbearable act because you were alone and you were isolated. I thought I was the only one. My father actually told me to never, ever speak about it, ever. And we didn't for 42 years. And as I met other survivors, I learned that they too didn't speak about it. And it really did alter our lives, and it changed us, and it robbed us of our agency, our autonomy, who we were or who we could have been. Once he was captured and I was able to get support, and a whole new world opened up for me that I didn't know existed. I didn't know any of this may have been waiting for me all that time, and I didn't ask for it because I didn't know I could. And so once I got that help and transformed, which I'm sure we will talk about, I was not going to keep it to myself because I know I was not the only one who kept it quiet and isolated myself. And so I owe it to myself as a survivor who finally got help, to all those people out there that are saying, I wish I had someone to talk to. And so silence is not the way to go. Speaking out is, and that's what I have vowed to do. This is where I need to be today, speaking with you all.
Would you mind sharing with us what happened that night when you were 15?
My parents went to a Christmas party. I was home alone, and it was Christmas time, a week before Christmas. And that was a very cool thing because I'm a teenager and I'm home alone. So I called my best friend, Lori, lived across the street, said, hey, come over. My mom and dad are gone. Robin doesn't get home until 9 o'clock tonight. And we have the house to ourselves. So she came over and, we're playing the radio, but we were listening to like the Doobie Brothers, ZZ Top, all the good music. We're just blasting it, talking about boys and all this stuff. And then her mom called and just ruined the whole thing because she had to go home to make Christmas cookies. She left. And then I popped a pizza in the oven and went to go play the piano, just to wait that 10 minutes, right? And so while I was playing, I heard a noise and I paused, trying to, hear what it is. Did the heater come on or, whatever it was, it got my attention, but I didn't hear anything more. And so I continued to play. And then just seconds later, a man came around me and put a knife to my throat and pushed it like almost all the way in and said, if I were to scream, he'd shove it all the way through and he would kill me. And I became his 10th victim that night. And so that memory on that piano bench is the last vivid, crystal clear memory I have of that night. And to this day, I don't play the piano and I can't even read music anymore. What I remember through that night is being completely powerless. I couldn't move because I was bound and gagged and blindfolded. I couldn't speak. I felt like my body wasn't mine. And because of how tightly he tied my hands and feet, I couldn't feel my hands or feet either. And all I could hear, that was the only sense I had left at that point, was him telling me that he would take my life at any time when he chose. And that night, he repeatedly raped me and he moved me in and out of the house. So in the cold, freezing, right before Christmas, it's not freezing because California doesn't freeze, but it felt pretty cold. And he moved me in and out of the house like I was an object, not a human being. And that is a very common occurrence when women are raped. We are reduced to being objectified and being objects. Eventually, though, the house became quiet and he had left me inside. And I thought maybe he had left, but he had not. His name is Joseph James DeAngelo. So you'll hear me call him DeAngelo. His thing was about mentally torturing the women. And the more he did that, the more it drove him to do more. That was, exciting for him. That was what he was after. So I tried to move. I tried to sit up, but he had not gone. He was right beside me. I couldn't hear him breathe. I couldn't hear him move. I had no idea he was there. And then I felt him lean in and hiss in my ear, don't move or I'll kill you. I'm going to estimate through that night, probably at least 20 times. He told me he was going to kill me. And I completely believed that he was going to kill me. And so time crawled by and I waited and I hoped and I prayed. And I even sang Jesus Loves Me in my head just to pass the time away. And after what felt like hours, and it wasn't hours, but it felt like hours, something in me broke and I just couldn't stay bound any longer. I didn't care anymore what he was going to do. I had to try. He already told me he was going to kill me. So I was already prepared for that. So I moved again, but this time he was gone. There was nothing. And I tried to get up, but I was bound, right? So I was getting up, falling down because I had nothing to hold with. But I finally did get up And I was able to get to the phone and Rotary 1976, keep that in mind, and called my friend Lori and told her I'd been raped. And she said, "You're kidding, right?" And I was like, "No, tell your dad." So they ran over, found me naked, standing in the family room, still bound. Her dad cut off the ropes, and then her mom found a blanket for me. And then they called the police, which kind of was trauma number one. Then there's trauma number two, the police interview. Then there's trauma number three, the rape kit. And then for me, there was trauma number four when my dad ordered us to never, ever talk about it. And we never did, not with my parents, not even one time. They've both passed away without ever, 49 years, if they were alive, we still would not have spoken about it. And I wonder sometimes if I would even be speaking about it because that message was so ingrained in me as truth. I don't know if I would have found the help or have spoken about it. So I am sad that they're gone, but I don't know if I would have healed if they were still here.
Thank you for sharing your story. You had mentioned this about the rape kit, and exams have changed over the years. And what was your experience like about that?
It was very clinical. When we got to the hospital, first of all, keep in mind that I'm 15. So I've never had a pap smear. I've never been completely naked in front of somebody. And when the nurse came to get me, it was actually 2 hours later. So very uptight family. Keep in mind how my dad's already acting, waiting silently in the waiting room to be called. When they called me in, my mom got up to come with me, but I told her no, because I was humiliated. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I know it wasn't going to be any good. So I just told her no. The best way I can explain it, and keep in mind that I totally understand, they're there to do a job. They're trying to collect forensic evidence, but that was not explained. It was kind of, where were you touched? And that's where they touched. Where I was probed, they probed. I was touched, they touched. So it was an assault all over again. And it was very, I've used the word, but this is the only word there. It was very traumatizing for me. And I still am traumatized by that. I remember a big magnifying glass was put over my body, and it had gone over every inch of my body. And that still gives me the creeps, to see my body blown up, every inch of it, every area. And I'm glad it's better now, but I'm going to assume that it is still very traumatizing. And to make matters worse for me, at that time, statute of limitation was only 3 years. And so that whole rape kit was thrown out. All of that was for absolutely nothing. What comes naturally to me to say is, I don't know if I would get a rape kit if it happened again, because so few perpetrators are actually even convicted or even arrested. It's a big deal when a woman trusts the system enough to go in and give all the evidence she can and to really partner with law enforcement to find the rapist.
A lot of people know you as the survivor of the Golden State Killer, but before we talk about the work that you do now and your advocacy, could you just talk a little bit about who you were at the time of the attack? How did that change the course of your life, even if you didn't know it at the time?
So I was very religious. I went to a Christian school. I loved God. I loved going to church. That was my social circle. That was the foundation of my faith. That was, pretty much my life, because everything was connected. And when I was in the 8th grade, I gave a speech at graduation and talked about my faith, and that I was choosing to move to a public school that I wasn't so protected in, because I wanted to share the word of God. So I was summer getting ready to go. I went. I really liked it. But then only 3 months later, so I turned 15 in September, the end of September. And by, a couple months after that, I got raped. And I tried to talk about it at the church. They wanted nothing to do with it. I was more, again, no one ever blamed me. I'm going to say this, but no one ever told me it wasn't my fault. The messaging is very fuzzy there. I gave up. The church didn't want to hear it. My parents didn't want to hear it. I didn't know I could get help. We didn't have victim advocates. Those did not exist. PTSD, by the way, that was not even a word until 1980. And I got raped 4 years before that. We really was a different time. Oh, and then we moved 6 months later, and I went to 3 different high schools in 1 year. So a lot of upheaval was going on in my life, and there was no prayers. There was no, how can I help you? It wasn't there. And so I checked out. I would say internally, I was very confused. All this messaging through the church, how we should love and accept and all of this. And I didn't have an identity anymore. I didn't have my friends anymore because we moved. I wasn't a child anymore. I felt as though I didn't want to do the things I did maybe a week before. I didn't even care about Christmas. I didn't care about those things. But then I wasn't an adult either. And so I was just in limbo. And that's a very vulnerable time. And so all those internal conflicting stuff was going on. And after we moved, all those changes became external. So now I'm sneaking out of the house. I'm not locking doors. I'm experimenting with drugs. I am hanging out with anybody who liked me because I didn't have an identity to cling like, no, we are not the same. No, whoever liked me, I wanted to be like them. And so I hung out with as we called them, stoners back then. But I also was on the tennis team. I also was on the journalism club. I had straight A's. I just was anything and everything. That was very difficult to keep up with. So I would say I know who I was before, kind of who did I become after for many, many decades was very complicated because after the high school years, now I'm graduated and I have a great job. Looks like I'm going to college, but I could not keep a relationship. I've been divorced twice. I'm on my 3rd marriage, which I'm so glad that 3rd time's the charm because this man is amazing. But I struggled. I struggled with who I was. I couldn't keep a relationship. I couldn't keep a friend. The secret was so big. What if somebody found out? So I really threw myself into my career, into my yard, big garden. It's actually a beautiful garden, but I worked in it. I'd get home from work and start working in the yard. I couldn't have any downtime. And now I look at it, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that because now I don't really touch it anymore. But that one event for me with no support really shattered the next 4 decades for me.
You're often introduced as a survivor. What does that word mean to you?
I go back and forth. Sometimes I call myself a victim, but people don't like that word. And the point is, I am a victim who survived. A victim and survivor to me are interchangeable because if you survived, you are a survivor. However, that victimization came first. And that is where the trauma begins, is through, I guess that's what a survivor is getting past that trauma and finding a way to continue on. But not everybody feels that way. I think the victim and survivor whole thing, sometimes I talk about it in our group and it's always a debate. I will say now, with that said, my base is a victim. But being the survivor that I've turned into means it's a part of me and it's going to stay a part of me. I don't minimize it. I don't deny it. It's now ingrained into my person as a whole story. And I feel like that's important because what people often do, whether they're a survivor or a victim, however they identify, has to be able to accept that this has happened and not try to do everything in your power to never talk about it or to avoid it or to do any of that. So for me, I think the survivorship came into play when I decided that I am done being silent. That's for me. Other people it's too personal and they may still be in their mind a great survivor, and they are, but how we handle it is up to the person. And people get very insulted when they're called victims or called the wrong thing. So I often even ask somebody, I don't want to say, how do you identify, but when we're talking about this, which word best describes you?
And you had talked about this a little bit about, the shame and stigma and just the rape culture that we live in. But was there ever a version of your story, of your experience, that you believed so much early on that you really had to rewrite that or unthink it?
I was one of those that tried not to think about it, but I can tell you for sure that I thought he was dead or that he was in prison. And even as late as in my 50s, I sometimes thought I made it up and that I was going crazy and that this never happened. And I remember telling my husband, I'm embarrassed, but I don't think this happened, because I had so removed it. It was buried so deep that I could no longer connect to it. I had lived like decades, right, by pushing it down. So during those years, I didn't have those triggers anymore. Remember, I was really rebellious and I definitely had PTSD, but I didn't know it. But I had built a pretty strong layer of thickness that trauma wasn't seeping through anymore. But it was still there. And that's when I thought I must be making this up because I couldn't connect to it. Yet I'm pretty sure it happened, but maybe it didn't. I didn't have a police report. I didn't have anything to prove it. And I just remember him saying that night, Kris, it happened. I know it's hard, but it happened.
DeAngelo was caught about 7 years ago. So when you found out, where were you? How did you feel about it? How did you find out?
Thank you for asking that, because that is actually the beginning of my real story. When I speak about what happened, I was in a pause mode for so long. And on April 24th, 2018, I was actually in Los Angeles, and I was on a work trip. And I was hanging out and having drinks and after the conference and just socializing. And we were all like, we're going to skip the breakfast tomorrow and just sleep in. We're like, yeah. And so while that was happening, what I didn't know, right, was that the activities in Sacramento, where I live, were crazy busy. They were planning an arrest, and that was going to change my whole life, but I had no idea. And so I went to bed that night, and then the next morning, my phone buzzed like 6 a.m, and I'm looking over at it, and it's my daughter. And I had just told her about my attack like 3 weeks before, and now she's buzzing me. And I look at the text, and it says 6 words. I think he has been caught. And I'm like, what is she talking about? So I put the phone down, went back to bed. And then all of a sudden I did realize what she was talking about. And I bolted straight up and I called her immediately, and she answered. And I didn't even say hello. I just said, are you telling me he got caught, arrested? And she said, yeah, I think he has. And I said, how do you know this? This part's kind of funny. Her husband, Tony, she says, Tony saw it on Reddit. Can you believe that? It was on Reddit. And I'm like, okay, right? And then another call came in, and it was my husband. And he said, hey, babe, I want you to know, I think they've arrested the East Area rapist. I am getting shivers now when I tell this story, because remember, I was just saying 42 years on pause. Well, that pause had abruptly went back onto play. And then a moment later, I got another call, and it was from Carol Daly, and she was one of the original investigators on the case. She wasn't my investigator, but she called and she said, hi, Kris, this is Carol Daly. I'm calling to tell you that the East Area rapist has been arrested. It is a 100% DNA match. We know it's him. And I honestly just went into shock at that moment. And that trap door, like, it waits those memories wait patiently for you wherever we store them. And it rocked my whole world. And I managed to stutter out, "Thank you." And then she said, "I have to go because we have to call everybody. We don't want anyone hearing it on the news." So it was a quick one and done thing. And I'm like, okay, I understand. And at that moment, I stood still in the hotel room for probably, well, I don't know how long. It seemed like a really long time. I couldn't move. I was right back at that 15-year-old girl right there. And I was absolutely terrified. And I began to shake. I began to be unable to think logically. For an example, do I take a shower? Do I go back to bed? Do I go tell my boss? Do I just wait till the training's over? I could do that. And the part that really stands out to me about that day is, once again, I was alone. I was by myself. There was no support. It was awful. It was just horrible. I finally did take a shower, and I did go down and tell my boss, and she helped me get on a little bus to go to the airport. I could not make an airline reservation. She had to do that for me. And then when I was on the bus, I spaced out. I'm crying, by the way. I can't stop crying. And I missed the stop. So the bus guy, he went through all the airlines. He's like, "You didn't get off." He's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." He's like, "What airline?" I'm like, I don't know. My logic was gone. And so I finally figured it out. I was trying to find a tip for him in my purse. I don't know if you can picture how I'm explaining this. I am a complete mess. He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "You need to take care of you today." Very kind words. And so I found my way into the airport. I'm bawling and crying. Now my phone is starting to buzz a little bit. And then there's the news, the East Area Rapist has been caught. And I found out during that time that there's going to be a press conference. And I'm like, okay, second wave of terror now for the day, because I don't know who he is. He had a mask on. And so now I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, what if he's my dad's best friend? Or what if he was my teacher? What if this masked man is now going to have a face? That was terrifying. And so still bawling my head off, and I get the last seat on Southwest. I'm at the very back in between two very large businessmen, and I'm bawling. And they're just like looking at each other. I remember that, like, what do we do with this mess? And the press conference started while I was in the air. So I watched it, and I saw his face in between two large businessmen by myself on the plane. And I was relieved that I did not know who he was. So when I got home, my husband picked me up at the airport. We went home listening to the press conference still. And it was very surreal. And that day, I don't know why, but I didn't want to be in my house. And so we sat in the backyard and drank some wine. And I cried and started trying to put the pieces together. And then the next day, I decided I needed to thank our district attorney, because for so many years, I either doubted it happened, or he's in prison, or he's dead, whatever. And I just never wanted to hear that name. I never wanted to hear a name. I didn't want to hear East Area Rapist again. And these people tirelessly never gave up. And Anne Marie Schubert, she's from Sacramento. She remembered when this was all going on in 1976. She was 2 years younger than me, and the terror that just went through the community. And she said, I'm not going to give up until I find this person. And she said, it's a needle in a haystack. So they joined the DNA along with genealogy. And through that, they were able to narrow it down to 3 people. And they knew from the DNA that he was Italian, that he was white, early balding, and blue eyes. And so as they went through the whole thing, they found a 4th cousin, and then they built the tree down from there. And they had 3 people. He was one of them. And they knew it was him because he had blue eyes. The other 2 had brown. And I'm just like, wow. So I went to Trader Joe's. Well, my husband drove me. I was in no shape to drive. But I chose 42 roses and put them all into one vase. And as I was trying to put each rose, as I kept adding, it got harder and harder to put them in. And it was at that moment, I can remember, I realized how many years I had lived with this nightmare, because it had been 42 years. So it was 42 roses, one for each year. And they barely fit in that jar. And so I brought them to her the next day. She agreed to see me, like amazing. I'm sure a lot was going on because they're getting an arraignment. And I was able to bring them to her and tell her, thank you. I cried. I am not a crier. And I cried probably 48 hours straight. And then the next day, we had a private meeting with Anne Marie Schubert plus her other people, Paul Holes. He was a very major person in the technology area, and the sheriffs. And then because the rapes happened and the murders between 13 counties, there were a lot of DAs there as well. This was very surreal. We got there and I was so nervous because I honestly never thought I would meet another victim ever. No one had ever come forward, like we were invisible people. And so when we walked in that room, it was full of survivors and their families and DA and, a lot of people. And they walked us through how he was caught. And I just remember looking around the table, is this a victim? Is that a victim? Is that a parent? It just was like this surreal moment seeing the collateral damage. We were all damaged by him. And it's one thing to think it's just you. Then when you see the enormity of it, it's overwhelming. So when that was done, I remember walking out and their victim advocate tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, Yeah, I'm fine. Don't I look okay? And she said, no. I was completely falling apart. I was holding it together the very best I could. And I didn't fool anyone. They put us into vans to go to the arraignment because the press, if you can imagine, was everywhere. It was a circus. So as I was getting into the van, I had like one foot and I just turned to my husband and said, "I can't do this." He says, "What's wrong?" I said, "I'm having a major anxiety attack. I cannot do this." And he kind of just pushed me into the van and said, "Yes, you can." And that was the best thing he could have done because yes, I could have. I didn't know my strength. And had I backed out and not been in that experience, I would have missed out on so much. So we're in the vans, we're looking out the windows. There's probably 8 or 9 vans because there's a lot of us. And they're going into the underground parking lot for the police department. I had never seen one of those. It seriously looked like the Batman cave was opening up. It was a big metal. I was like, wow, and we went in the back door into the room where nobody was yet. They let all the victims in first, let us choose our seats. But then after that, shortly after, the doors opened and all the press came in and there were a lot. And all you heard was cameras clicking, setting up. They were filming us, the victims, which, that was a very vulnerable time. And Steve and I, we chose front row. And then they let some public in, not very many because there wasn't much room left. And then we all expected him to come into, I don't know what it's called, their holding cell. All of our eyes are kind of peeled on that. And then the back door opened and they pushed DeAngelo in on a wheelchair. And DeAngelo is not frail. He had been seen trailed by the officers doing 100 miles an hour on the freeway just the day before he was arrested. So now a whole act is coming and he couldn't speak. It was an act. And everybody in that room just sighed like, oh my God. I wouldn't have known that except they had prepped us for that in our private meeting. Like he's going to come in looking very, very frail. Don't buy it. It's an act. Anyways, long story short, when I came home from the arraignment, unfortunately, I had to work. I was a senior manager for American Cancer Society. And I don't know if you guys know what Relay for Life is, but it's a fundraiser. You walk 24 hours. And ours was that night. And the person that was in charge of it quit. So I had to do it. So I basically came home, changed my clothes, put on my work shirt. The house was full of volunteers, folding shirts and all this. And I had to get through that next couple of days as though nothing happened. So when you say, like, where were you when you found out? Like, it's a whole series of events that bled all into each other because there was no break. That was the moment. That was the weekend, the 4 days, whatever. I have to get help. I had dodged it for so long. And I knew with the crying and trying to act happy and not being, and, just all of that told me loud and clear that you're not going to survive this, Kris, if you don't get help. And so that's why I said that's where my story really started, because that is when I used the services from the Victim Compensation Fund, found an amazing trauma therapist, went through 2 years of agonizing therapy, and found my voice and started to heal. And had he not been caught, I would be right back where I was 7 years ago.
Kind of shifting into how you got into, your current work and
the fun part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about Phyllis's garden.
Phyllis was the very first victim of DeAngelo, and I met her at our second hearing, and she was a great lady, funny. She had this dry humor. We just really became good friends. So we went to every hearing together. We made fudge at Christmas together. We spent hours on the phone processing what happened to us. Nobody wants to hear hours on the phone of a rape victim going through every detail, but she did. And I wanted to hear hers. So we were very, very important to each other, not just as friends, but also as healing. So a few months before she passed away, she found out that she had cancer. And it was a real journey for her, because here is justice right here. And was she going to live long enough to see it happen? And she did. And her sister read her victim impact statement for her. And Phyllis actually was able to attend the sentencing in a wheelchair. And then a couple months later, she passed away. And just to share part of the strength of the survivors of DeAngelo, myself, Carol Daly, the investigator I was talking to you about, her sister, and a couple others were there until she transitioned and passed away. She knew that she was loved. We all stood right by her. And another survivor called in. She's a musician, and she sang Silent Night to her. Our therapist, she and I had the same therapist. She wrote a poem for her and called it in. And it was a beautiful passing. And so that is where Phyllis's garden came from. And then I met a gal named Gay, and she was the 36th victim. And she and I were also friends, and Phyllis. And when Phyllis passed away, Gay and I decided that we wanted to share our growth with others, and it was important to pay it forward. And so I said, I would like to start a nonprofit. And so we named it Phyllis's Garden, and it's in her honor. And Phyllis's Garden is all about survivors and supporters. We want to be there. We offer hope. We offer an ear. We offer strength. We have 4 different programs that we offer. One of them is a virtual support group, and that's called Sexual Assault Survivors. It's Time to Tell Your Story. And that's online. It's Facebook. It's private. There's over 1,000 in it. Some of these people are just like me. They've been silent. They might be in their 50s, and this group might be the first person they've ever told their story to. And supporters too, we encourage them, because I feel like if our group only has survivors in it, then what does that mean? That means we're still keeping it a secret, right? And so this is a way for us to educate others. This is how you talk to a survivor. This is how you're going to get best results in being a strong support for them. We also have a in-person group. It's called UBU, and it's kind of come as you are. And we have speakers every month, and we food and we socialize, and it's really great to be able to see face to face another survivor, and to know that if something is said that triggers you, it's okay. You can say, oh my God, I just got triggered, and you're going to have a whole bunch of people around you. And so we've met a lot of great friends, and it is actually in a garden, and this group has helped me so much. The next meeting we have is in July, and we will be talking about telling our stories and why that's so important for however you decide your story is to be told, whether you write music or you keep a journal or you tell someone, or, whatever, about how that is really the first step in healing. So we have lots of different speakers that talk about areas that they are well-versed in. Then we also have a program that we call Sharing Victims' Perspectives. And that is almost kind of what I'm doing is we speak in podcasts or at conferences, rotaries, wherever, because I really mean it when I say I'm not going to be silenced anymore. People need to understand that the bias that we have had for generations, handed down, that says it's always the victim's fault because of what she's wearing and all of those things that we hear all the time are harmful. And they're not true. It's not the truth. The truth is the rapist raped and they raped a victim. And I think it's safer for people to feel as though there's a way to be safe, like live in the right neighborhood, wear the right clothes, follow the right rules, date the right boys, don't stay out too late. If you check off all those rules, then you're going to be safe. That is not true. 75% of victims do not report. And to me, that number should shake us. Wow. That is a really big number. And it should change us. It should move us to change, but we can't change until we understand what we're trying to change. So here's the stats from RAIN. 48% were sleeping or doing something else in their own home. 29% were traveling to or from work, school, or running errands. 12% were at work. 7% were attending school. And 5% were engaged in some other routine activity. If you let that sink in for just a minute, all of those things, if I don't go out at night, if I don't do this, I don't do that, are false because nearly half were in their own house, living their life. And I'll bet you every single person, you included, that's hearing this, does most of those things on a daily basis. So obviously, our culture is still clinging to an idea that is wrong. And somehow it's easier to live that way to live in the real world. And I just feel like we do have the better laws. We do have better training. But if our culture still clings to the bias that exists and chooses to ignore the facts, those things don't matter that we've done to move forward because 75% of us are still not telling anyone. And I feel like that is shocking. Back to what we were talking about, our fourth program is an initiative that I feel very, very strong about, and that is soft interview rooms. So again, we're talking about that in California. I don't know about other states, but trauma-informed training is mandatory for detectives in their first 6 months. So that's great training. It's wonderful. And I actually speak at some of those as part of our victim perspective. However, if the stations are going to interview with this great trauma-informed interviewing skills, and they put them in the room that a perpetrator is in, metal chairs, it's sterile, it's cold, they make it cold on purpose, all of that, you just counteracted everything. All that victim wants is to get out of that room. Soft interview rooms means making a room that is specific for a victim of violent crime, not just sexual assault. They need to be in a room where they feel comfortable, where it looks like a family room, where there's soft paintings and there's art and there's food and there is drinks. When's the last time they ate? It's very nerve-wracking to go in and make a statement. And you're not making it easier if you're in a room that a suspect gets interviewed in. I did some digging, and what I found out is that most stations do have money left over in their budget, but they give it back rather than invest in a soft interview room. And the only way that these stations will ever have a soft interview room is if it's donated. And so Phyllis's Garden is raising money throughout our communities, all through donations. We've done 10 of them so far. Phyllis's Garden has only been in existence for about a year and a half. And my goal is to just keep doing them until anywhere a victim is raped, when they go in to make a statement, if they're brave enough to do so, they're treated with dignity and integrity and with respect. And so that is our fourth program. And for me, it is very, very really special, I guess. It's very rewarding to be able to give to other victims in this manner. Those are our programs. And I want to say something that I've really just resonated with since I've talked to you the first time is this statement. I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is so right. And it is, your past shapes how your brain operates today. Like, that's big. Your past shapes how your brain operates today. It influences how you see danger, how you see beauty, how you see yourself. And boy, it's full of truth, because it did for me. And unfortunately, my past was 42 years before I began to deal with it. And I just really, really hope that people who have been raped, whether you want to report or you don't want to report, that is completely your choice, your control. But find help. Don't let that many years go before you find help. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
What, I guess, is the average cost of a soft interview room?
It is between, I would say, $2,500 and $3,500. The last one we did was a little higher because they had a really large window in their, like the length of the wall. And it was in Fresno, California. And Fresno is very hot. Normally, we don't have to do that. We supply the paint, the furniture. Their room had, some walls had baseboards, some didn't. So we really had to throw everything out in that room and just start from scratch. Some rooms are a little newer and they don't need paint. And so, it just depends on the state of the room and the involvement of the city. One of our cities, Folsom, California, we did, and they had a one-way mirror, like they have on SVU. And so you look at it, I'm like, I didn't even know those existed anymore. And you look at it and you're just looking at yourself like, okay, no victim wants to see themselves, period. Not during that time. They're so focused on other things. And so they didn't use that anymore. That was actually somebody's office. And so the city came in and removed it. And they, put drywall on it and all that stuff. So some of the cities are very helpful and saying, yes, we can get our general services to do this. Some cities, like the prior one I was telling you about, was like, no, we won't do anything. So there's about $1,000 difference in there. We try to make it as beautiful as possible, but still trying to make it so that our donations can spread as far as possible. Yeah, they're not expensive. It's not going to hurt anyone's budget to put.
Because it'd be great if, other places, started to do the same thing.
And that question, by the way, is asked often.
What does solidarity among survivors look like to you, especially when everyone's healing process is so different?
You're right. We all heal different. Some are still healing. Some are further. Some are like, I don't want to touch this. I'm out. But during the hearings and during this process, we were in hearings like every month. And so we were together, the ones that were in town, a lot. And it really just meant being there. Kind of like what I was talking about, that UBU group where you can just come as you are. I think that solidarity means being together, knowing, okay, it's not telling our stories. It's knowing. It's a shared knowledge that we have an understanding that doesn't need to be spoken about. We know. I remember the first time, like I was talking about in the arraignment and seeing all these victims. But now that I know who they are, I remember just standing back. We were actually in my backyard and thinking, wow, he's been in her house and her house and her house. He broke into her house and their house. And oh my God, that was so overwhelming of knowing that these people experienced exactly what I experienced, not from the personal side, like how do I deal with this? How, going into shock and all that, but just the reality that they experienced somebody breaking into their home many of them woken up in the middle of the night, feeling powerless, him eating all of our food, making his home. All of those were exactly the same thing. Now, what he actually did to each of us didn't matter as much to know, because I think anyone who has been sexually assaulted knows it's not about the sexual assault itself. If it was just a rape and we got over it the next day, had a bad night, move on. It doesn't work like that. It changes who you are, the internal structure of your person. And that we all understood. Maybe we experienced it different, but I was in a group that said, I get you. And we helped, we got each other through every one of those hearings. It was amazing. Good can come out of bad.
So you work with law enforcement professionals and also just other sorts of professionals. What's something about law enforcement culture that you think that the public doesn't understand, or, is important to understand in terms of when it comes to sexual assault survivors? Maybe how law enforcement views them or treats them, or just the process.
Yeah, I feel like the detectives that I've met, and I've met a lot of them, they really are on the victim's side. They want to know how they can do better. One of my favorite parts about when I do the presentations and talk about from a victim's perspective, these are things you could do to help a victim trust you, to help a victim feel like you're in their corner. At the end of my presentations, because I could go on for days, right? There's so many different aspects to this experience, but just the questions that they ask and how many questions they ask tells me they want to do the best job that they can do. They are not looking at their watch. They are not getting up to go for a break. You've been in those presentations where it's over and they go, are there any questions? And you're thinking, no, please, no questions. I want to go. That's not them. And I also talk to cadets, people that are just coming into their law enforcement career, and they have so many questions. For the cadets, I feel like, and the detectives too, I think one of the biggest realizations they have is how biased our world is and how that disservices a victim, how they really have to check themselves at the door. Because I can tell you, just by having three of us here on this podcast, not knowing you at all, but I'm going to venture to guess we were all raised differently, and we might be different religions, and we might have a different way of looking at the world. But when you're raised that way, you think that is the world. So when you walk in to a victim's home or wherever you're meeting them, they also have a way they were raised. And the officer cannot come in with his implicit biases. You may not know he have them, right? So I'm saying this is when you really take a look at yourself and be able to check that you have to walk in and accept her view of the world, not yours. I think it's just those types of things that I can offer them that is not in a textbook. And they are the most caring, interested people. They always come up after. That's where most of the soft rooms that I do come from, are from detectives in that training, going back to their captain saying, we have to have one of these. They're on our side. They're doing this not because they got a promotion and make more money. They're doing it because they want to be part of the solution. And they want to catch that bad guy. They really do.
On the flip side of the question, is there anything that, as the general public or even as sexual assault survivors, is there anything that is misunderstood about law enforcement and how they kind of approach these situations?
Basically, they're there to do a job, just a job, only a job. And sometimes they're not treated well if they're not. Tell me what happened, then what happened, then what happened, then what happened. Victims of sexual assault don't think like that. Their brain actually changes. And when they're trying to give their statement and they're being interrupted, wait, go back. That couldn't have happened then. What happened? Like, that is going to kill your interview. And it's better if they just listen. They can put it together later, but let the victim talk. Maybe 3 days later, we can go back and revisit that. I don't know, but let her talk. Give her, I would say the biggest thing that the officers, that people have experienced, we'll say this, that makes them not want to go forward, going to that 75%, is that it is all about the officer. It's nothing about the victim. And I believe that probably doesn't happen as often, but I do believe it happens. And also, the first person that is going to see you when you report is going to be a patrol officer, not a trauma-informed officer. It's going to be someone new to the force, because everybody starts out in patrol, and they really don't have any experience. It's a shame that, well, for the cadets, they do get that training, and I do speak at it because they will be the first person. And what I say to them, and this is very true, and I'm going to believe it's true for everybody, but I could be wrong, is that first person is going to be the person you remember forever. Forever. You're scared. You're vulnerable. You might not have any clothes on. Like they're in a very, very vulnerable area, and they'll be remembered. So they get to choose. Do you want to be remembered as that asshole? Or do you want to be remembered as the person that helped you move forward? So I do believe that many people have had bad experiences. I have heard many women, after they report it to the first person, they don't go forward because they were treated so poorly. And that's a matter of training, and bias and all that stuff we're talking about. These guys just aren't equipped. So the more we get the word out, the more equipped they'll be.
What has been bringing you joy lately, big or small?
I think the engagement with our nonprofit, with the programs that we have, people are resonating with them, and they are saying, they're validating our efforts. I just went to a vendor fair at a college, and just talking to these young women and they have a wellness program where there's a therapist there, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you come speak. Warms my heart to know that people actually want to talk about it and they want to hear it. Not everybody is the naysayer. There is a good part of the population that says, yes, we need to hear more. We want to learn. And that is how our world will change. It won't change by putting in new laws. They help, but if people aren't open to understanding what this even is, it's not going to help that much. I had at the beginning, like when I really just started to talk about it, I have a neighbor who really didn't like the fact that I was talking about it. And he spread up and down the neighborhood that I just wanted attention. And I was really upset and really hurt. And obviously, I didn't have fond feelings for him anymore. But as I continued to grow and learn, then one day I was like, you know what? You're damn straight right. I want attention. I'm going to shout this from the mountaintops. Yeah. Yes. And I wasn't far enough along to think that way then. But now I dare someone to say something to me because I am proud of what I'm talking about. And you're not going to, my story is not my shame. What brings me joy is my own growing because of people like you, like your listeners, the people in the support groups. Everything I do brings me joy. It does, because I feel like maybe there is change. And I feel like, if I could say, it's almost like the transformation of a caterpillar. People now say, and I hear them say it, like, Kris, you're just not the same. Like, you were so different than 10 years ago, people that know me. And here's what I would say to that. Like, a caterpillar doesn't know it's going to become a butterfly. It has no idea. All it knows is it has to endure the cocoon. It has to be able to survive the darkness and to allow that transformation to happen that it is not knowing. We don't recognize that transformation is happening at times because we feel the pressure. We feel the pain. We feel uncomfortable. So we don't see that as growth as we're going through it. We see it as a loss of everything familiar. My life in the past, the little caterpillar that's now turning into goo and transforming, will never be that caterpillar again. And then that one day they get strong enough to get out of the cocoon. And now guess what? They did change, but they're beautiful and they're free and they're flying. And that is what brings me joy, is that I can soar now. I can see that transformation, and now I can put it into words. I did feel a lot of pressure. It was really uncomfortable, but now I feel like my story hasn't destroyed me, and it has actually helped me, and I have not erased it, and I'm not going to minimize it. And I say that because you hear things like, oh, why couldn't she just get over it? It's 42 years ago. Oh, yes, these are words. Or tomorrow will be a better day. These things are what people think is helpful. But now I know it's not. I'm not going to minimize it, but it is now woven into the fabric who I am. And it's a part of my life. I don't have to pretend like it didn't happen anymore. And victims are not broken. They're just morphing into survivors, and it's painful. That's what brings me joy, being a butterfly.
What kind of legacy are you building for people who might never know your name, but will be safer or more heard because of your work?
Well, I hope that the stigma of rape goes away, making it the victim's fault, because the victim has already lost all control, all power. Everything's working against her. And then when the community emphasizes that by blaming her, it's so destructive. It tears a person down. So I would hope that we can talk about it more, that those reporting numbers go up because of the efforts that we're making to respect that victim, and that the perpetrators don't feel as safe raping, thinking that they'll never be caught. I guess that would be it, that a victim feels heard, respected, and supported. We just have to do better for every survivor. We have to start supporting them and not failing them.
This was a really great conversation. We learned a lot and you shared a lot, and I really want to thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And just the work that you're doing, it's a ripple effect. It has made a change, with 10 soft interview rooms. That's a lot. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for breaking the silence and being a butterfly.
Thank you. Really fun being here today. I want to thank you both for listening to my story. First part of healing is telling your story. The second part of healing is having someone listen to it.
I think it'll be really helpful for people to hear it and understand. A lot of times when you hear things, it's not from the person directly. It's like if you listen to like a true crime show and you hear it, it's not the same thing. It doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't mean the same thing.
Thank you so much, Kris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I had fun.
We want to thank Kris for joining us today and sharing her story with such honesty and strength. She's taken one of the most devastating experiences a person can endure and turned it into a source of connection, healing, and hope for others. She reminds us that survivors are not broken. They are resilient, resourceful, and when given space, capable of building something profoundly beautiful from pain.
Through Phyllis's Garden, Kris has created that space, a sanctuary where survivors can gather, be seen, and begin to heal on their own terms. It's more than a community. It's a movement that is led by survivors for survivors. To learn more, support the mission, or share it with someone who might need it, visit phyllisesgarden.com. We'll also have links to it on the episode's show notes.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Bound by the Cloak. Follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening.
Until then.